Hello, and welcome to the Band of One podcast. I am Riley Wilson. This podcast was designed for anyone that wants to start, develop, or fine-tune an existing solo or small group performing career. I have over 50 years of live performance experience and will include not only my tips, but the tips for other hardworking pros in their neck of the woods. The idea behind all of this is to help you be entertained, get some actionable information, make it profitable, and something you can use to make a better product for your audience. If you like what we do, like, share, and subscribe. Let's get underway. You know what this is? This is a bank deposit bag, and I've been using these things for over 50 years to carry guitar strings, picks, mic adapters, mic clips, anything you could imagine. They're free at any bank. They come with a nice sturdy zipper. It's a great place to hold a microphone if you don't have a microphone bag. But I highly recommend getting a couple, and you'll figure out what to use them with, because they're a great way of being organized on any kind of gig you could imagine, any time you have to get stuff from point A to point B. And I've gotten these from my local bank, and you can generally pick them up for free. In fact, I've actually got two of them, one in each of my equipment boxes, so that I've got duplicates of whatever guitar strings I need or tools or anything of that nature. So check that out. I think you'll find that'll be helpful.
Guitar Made Simpler, an intelligent approach, is the first all-new guitar method in years. Riley Wilson, veteran guitar teacher, writer, and performer, has taught this same material successfully to thousands of students since 1987. This logical approach will help anyone begin mastering the world's most popular instrument. A combination of formal notation with guitar tablature and included MP3 disc guarantee your success. Online video by the author demonstrating performing examples slowly and correctly. Start making real progress on the guitar. Order your copy today at guitarmadesimpler.com.
Life is all about problems. They are universal. And one thing that we know for sure is that it's one of the challenges that we all have to overcome as people in general, and especially entertainers in particular. How to navigate them is what we're going to talk about today, especially when we get something that really throws us for a loop. I have recorded this podcast 6 times, and all 5 previous versions were erased because I needed to update the software, and the company didn't let me know it was time to do so. So hopefully this one sticks. The most important thing is to have a long-term perspective on whatever it is that you're working on. For example, I started guitar lessons in Lexington, Kentucky at the age of 10 at a music store in town. They provided 3 different guitar teachers in a period of about 3 months, and the last one was such a disappointment to me that I decided to teach myself and stop taking lessons. I didn't learn to read music. Looking back on it now, that is a decision I ended up regretting. A decade later, I tried out for the house band opportunity at Opryland in Nashville. I was surprised that a rigorous sight reading examination was part of the audition process. Needless to say, I failed that. I came back a year later, simply let them know that I couldn't read music, and auditioned anyway, and once again I was passed on. Undeterred, however, I persevered and talked to the people at Carowinds about a similar opportunity at their theme park in 1978. They allowed my mediocre reading to not be a deterrent, and I ended up working on their country western show all that summer. This also was one reason I ended up attending Musicians Institute 5 years later. While the Opry experience was frustrating, I felt fortunate to be able to land the gig at Carowinds because my reading skills at that time were incredibly poor. Sometimes you may fail repeatedly before enjoying any success. Remember the story of Colonel Harlan Sanders and also Thomas Edison? Both men failed over 10,000 times before they finally achieved great success. In fact, many great failures have also become great successes. Brian Tracy suggests that failure is an indispensable part of success. Perhaps that's true. Adrian Belew had decided he was giving up on the music business when his wife said, You just received a phone call from Frank Zappa who wants you to audition for him. That one phone call changed the trajectory of his life. One of my favorite lines is from a Doobie Brothers tune entitled One by One. Michael McDonald sings the lyric, "Even when you're close to a dream, it can still let you down. It can still let you down. You'll always have a chance to give up, so why do it now?" This has always given me pause for reflection. Let's make this more personal. Say you've been in a band for years and have decided to pursue a solo or duo career, so you give them notice that you'd like to leave the group. Understand that depending upon how important you are to the group, it may take longer for them to find a replacement than is comfortable for you. When the time came for me to leave my group Still Creek Band in 1982, I had already signed an agreement with the leader of the band that I would give him 3 months' notice for him to find someone to replace me. Ironically, it took all 3 months to find someone to come in and replace me. That's an easy one. However, sometimes you may be ready to take flight only to find out that you're, for some reason, grounded. In 1984, after graduating from Musicians Institute, I agreed to go on the road with a group called the Hollywood Argyles. They had a hit record in 1963 called Alley-Oop, and it seemed like a good idea at the time. A year previous, I had turned down the opportunity to go on the road with the Box Tops and sing lead and play guitar on The Letter and things like that. Both groups had hit records, and as long as they performed those hit records, they could do anything else pretty much on the gig they wanted to do. The Box Top gig would have been fun. I love their material, but it was at the upper end of my vocal register, and I didn't feel that was sustainable long term. Also, they weren't paying very much, and were simply going to do a tour in Texas at the time. I had just gotten married, was still attending school, so that was an easy one for me to turn down. The Argyles had an original member in the band, and no sooner had I left my full-time banking job, all of a sudden all their future gigs disappeared within 48 hours. The group didn't have separate management, and so this forced me to scramble, and ultimately I ended up joining a Neil Diamond impersonator with whom I worked for about 1.5 years. That gig didn't pay the best, but it was stable, and allowed me to do that until I ended up joining the musical instrument manufacturing business for a couple of years in Los Angeles at the time. I was never able to make the kind of money playing gigs that I did in North Carolina and Southern California, so it was a pretty easy decision at the end of 1986 to move back to Raleigh, where my existing family lived, and to be able to start working in radio and pursuing teaching guitar while my wife and I raised our family. I did both within a short time of landing there and eventually traded the radio for weekend gigs, which paid a lot better and were a lot more fun. I had a good teaching business and ended up forming a trio in 1992, which I gigged with some success. However, about 1995, those gigs began to slow down a bit, and I started doing some solo gigs, which led our family eventually to Texas. We moved here in 1996, and the work has been steady since then. Even during the 2020 pandemic, I only took a couple of months off and ended up playing the rest of that summer and fall. Texas is still a good place for live shows, even though I am 30 years older. The common denominator with all of these things is that I had to pivot. Not like the Friends sitcom episode where Ross is trying to get a couch up a stairwell, but pivot nonetheless. Business markets continue to change, even here in Texas. And I found making tweaks along the way was absolutely critical if I hope to keep working. So the first suggestion that I have is be willing to pivot. If you're in a group, you might need to have a new member or let an existing member go. You might need to consider changing the style of music that you perform. Learn to sing or sing better. Maybe stop singing and start becoming an instrumental act. Every person watching this podcast will have a different idea or a different way in which they have to pivot with the times so that they can remain viable. At times, this pivoting or change of direction may cause a momentary setback, but if you keep pushing, you'll discover that your forward momentum will carry you in the right direction where you wish to end up. Many major players have done just that in their careers. For example, Eric Clapton left the Yardbirds at the top of their success for a period of self-reflection and intense study of blues, which led to him joining the Blues Breakers and eventually helping to form Cream. Chet Atkins began studying classical guitar once he was the head of the A&R department at RCA in Nashville. Randy Rhoads would take a nylon string guitar on the road with him and seek out private instruction during the day while he was in the midst of a massive tour with Ozzy Osbourne. Bill Connors left Chick Corea's Return to Forever group after one incredible record and tour and decided to move to New York City and also study classical guitar. The one thing each of these musicians have in common is that they kept pushing, even when it didn't look like that was going to be a bigger opportunity at the end of the time. One of my favorite things was seeing the great Chet Atkins in Raleigh in 1976 with the North Carolina Symphony Orchestra. Watching him play not only electric guitar, but also nylon string as well, and of course he was brilliant on all of them. Clearly, pivoting for a major label recording artist is going to look different than it would be for those of us that just happen to play occasionally during the week or on the weekends. And sometimes it's not going to look pretty. I had a regular restaurant gig here in Frisco, Texas from 1996 to the summer of 1999 when I let the owners know I was not going to be there for the millennial New Year's Eve, 1999. The owner's father got so furious with me that he fired me on the spot. Not to be outdone, I said, I quit, and we parted ways. I had a trio gig that paid me a lot of money, but I didn't have anything to immediately fall back upon, and went through a period where I didn't play anywhere near as much as I'd been playing every Friday and Saturday night at the restaurant. That particular job had become difficult, however, because I couldn't hear myself playing very well enough to play, and I felt like I got worse, especially at a large 8 or 10 top table where people are drinking and waiting for steaks to arrive. While I missed the money, I do believe my playing actually improved once I stopped working there. Every weekend, that gig required me to stroll and play acoustic guitar, standing up and walking up and down a flight of steps, relying on a headset mic and a wireless guitar setup to be heard. I learned a lot from that job, but I haven't played a strolling gig ever since, and frankly, I don't miss it. As I had pointed out before, I started using backing tracks in 1995 at a restaurant in Raleigh. Sometimes it's a rabbit hole I wish I hadn't gone down, to be honest, because I have mixed and remixed my songs at least 50 different times each. For a catalog of over 250 songs, that's incredibly time-consuming. I rationalize that what I did helped me to sound the very best that I can, and I think that that's helped me to have the success and stay as busy as I am now. However, if I'd simply continued singing and playing acoustic guitar and maybe adding a drum machine, I could probably have 2 or 3 times the number of songs in my catalog that I do right now. And yes, this has caused me to lose some gigs. However, I stay with tracks now because first, I'm comfortable with them. Second of all, they sound tremendous. And 3, they allow me to play a long gig of 4, 5, or even 6 hours without becoming exhausted or falling down. What will your setbacks look like? I don't know, but I can promise you that if you have the corresponding good attitude, you can overcome anything. Having a positive mental attitude is something I've talked about before in this podcast, and I don't think it can be overestimated just how important that really is. Those of us that regularly perform solo gigs now fight all the little battles in our mind that people outside our heads never see. For example, am I singing too hard? Am I singing too loud? What about this load in? The question shouldn't be what happens if I have a setback, but how do I deal with it? If you feel that you've done stupid things, let me assure you, I've done far stupider things. For example, Houston is a 4.5-hour drive from Dallas under the best conditions, and one time I got an hour and a half out of Dallas toward Houston and didn't realize I had forgot my guitar. I had to drive back for that, and a visit with the family member we had planned had to be eliminated just so I could make the gig on time. Battery failure, whether from an onboard guitar preamp, an effect pedal, a wireless, etc., have all created all kinds of issues for me over the years. I have forgotten mic stands, speaker stands, microphones, picks, and so many other things that I'm almost embarrassed to say them. However, this podcast is all about full disclosure, and the whole purpose of me sharing these kinds of goofs is so that hopefully you don't make the same goofs. Trust me, you'll make your own clever goofs. And try not let that happen to you. Several times I didn't load or bring sequences of songs the client had specifically requested, and I had to play it with only guitar and vocals. That didn't sound very good either. The most important thing to understand is while problems happen to everyone, the show must go on. Regardless of what type of setback it is, if you have the idea of going into the gig, you're going to do your best. Regardless of what happens, you'll end up on your feet one way or another. I often have to keep focused on the song I am singing as I'm singing it or performing it, and I'll keep reminding myself, they hired you because they like you, and the gig is going to turn out much better than you are imagining right now. Don't allow yourself to become victim to what Zig Ziglar used to call stinking thinking. Believe in yourself, and terrific things are bound to happen. It's so important to have a long-term perspective what it is that you're trying to do, and why are you doing it. This seems to be a universal problem, and it's not a new one. In the Old Testament, Jehovah tells ancient Israel, "My people perish for lack of a vision." For entrepreneurs, it's really important to be able to have an elevator pitch of what it is you do. For example, can you describe your musical act to somebody in 10 seconds or less? And here's an even more important question. Why do you do what you do? If you have a big enough why, you can stand anything that comes along in your path. I'll wrap up this particular podcast with a brief discussion about Elvis Presley. His 1950s career began with regional success in the South to eventual radio, television, and film success by 1958, when it was interrupted by a 2-year stint in the United States Army. Following his military discharge, he made almost 30 movies before that 1968 comeback special, which showed Elvis in rare form, demonstrating what he really loved to do, which was to simply play and sing and entertain other people. He pivoted a third time and played more than 1,000 gigs between 1969 and his death in 1977. All of us have to make concessions at once or twice or more in our lives and understand it for what it is. Don't let any setback derail you permanently, and have an eye towards the final goal. If you do your best to be true to yourself and realize no setback is permanent unless you allow it, you'll have a better attitude and the whole situation will work out much better for you. That's all for today. I'm Riley Wilson, and thanks for joining us on the Band of One podcast. If you have ideas for future podcasts or would like to be profiled, reach out to me through my Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Band of One podcast, or get in touch with me through our webpage, which is guitarmadesimpler.com. See you next time.